Okay, now it's time to look at text classification. So I sort of briefly mentioned this in the data sets video this week that I was going to try to figure out a way to take titles from poems and attach them to authors. That is the example I'm going to do here, but I actually don't recommend following along with that. It's actually a terrible idea. I did it previously, and when I ran my test, I saw why it didn't work. We'll talk a little bit about why it doesn't work as we go through the session. But I think it's actually good to sort of see, like, you have an idea, you try it, and you're like, oh, that doesn't work, and here's why it doesn't work. But the tools don't really tell you that. You have to go through the whole process to sort of figure out yourself. But alas, let's go through the process of training a text classifier, and then maybe I'll also highlight some areas where I would have done something differently had I realized sort of what I was getting myself into. So again, just like with the other autotrain tool, you're going to go to huggingface.co/autotrain. You're going to hit create new project. And then let's give this another name. So we'll call it text classifier 2 because I did text classifier 1 before. And we'll leave it. Let's actually do the NVIDIA T4 small again. Again, this is such a low price that it's worth it. I think training took me about 10 minutes. So it would have cost, what, like maybe 10 cents to do. So I think it's kind of worth it for that. We will set it to public. I'm going to sleep after 15 minutes of inactivity. Actually, let's set it to 30 because I might be making some changes here. And then we'll go ahead and hit create space. Again, this is going to take a couple minutes to get set up, so I'm actually just going to pause the recording and I'll come back when this is ready to go. Okay, so I've got AutoTrain running. We're going to go ahead and give this a name, so we'll call it text class. Actually, let's call it poetry author classifier. Now, the thing is, I need to make sure that my data is in the correct format. So I'm going to move task to text classification. And I'll leave the base model as this BERT one. It seems like the best one. I'm going to change the epochs to 10 again. Actually, you know what? I used 10 last time and it didn't really do enough. So let's crank it up to 20 and see what happens there. Again, this is supposed to be a no-code interface, but the reality is you need to sort of keep an eye on this. So there's going to need to be two columns. One is going to name text and one is named target. Let's go again over here to look at our format. We'll come down here to text classification. And you'll see the way the format needs to be in the CSV is we've got a text column, and then we've got a target column. The target column is our label or our class. So they're showing a sentiment analysis, which is positive and negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my file here. Let's see, where did I put it? I think it might be here. CSV. Man, too much stuff here. Here we go. So when I open this in numbers, this is the original data set. Remember, actually, this is not the original data set. Here we go. This is our original data set. You'll see here that I have a lot of different columns, right? I've got author, I've got a title, I've got an ID, and I've got a content. Now, what I really want is just the title and the author. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just delete these rows or these columns that I don't need. So we'll click here and we'll go delete selected columns. And that gives me just this, and I'm going to delete the index as well. All right, cool. So now I've got my author and my title. And I want these labels at the top here to match this setup, so text and target. So if I come back over here and I go to this, I want my target to be my author. And it must be lowercase. Numbers, for me, tries to make this thing uppercase, and I don't know why. So we've got this now. So we've got our text, which is our titles, and we've got our target, which is the authors. So now what I can do is I can go to here and go to File, Export to CSV. And I'm just going to save this as formatted. And what we can do is we can come back over here and we're going to click on this and we're going to select the formatted CSV. Now I happen to know for a fact this is still going to throw an error. We'll look at that error in just a second, and then I'll explain why we got an error here. And then we'll go back and do some reformatting. So let's hit start training. And we'll say, yes, I'm sure. And sure enough, I get an error message that says, please check the logs for more information. Come over to logs. And if I come down here, my very last sort of value error is the least populated class in Y has only one member, which is too few. The minimum number of groups for any class cannot be less than 2. So what's happening here? So if I go back over to this and I click on one of these things, let's go sort by ascending. You'll see here that in many cases I've got a lot of authors, right? But then in some of these cases I have one author and only one, I've got the author only with one book. And the problem here, or sorry, only one poem. The problem here is that this is not acceptable. For every reason, this tool, I kind of know why, because of split testing and other things, needs to have at least more than one poetry title per author in order to do the testing. So unfortunately, like, we're kind of blocked here because we can't really do this. If you go through this thing manually and like remove every single one of them, that would be a thing you could do. It would take you forever, especially with large data sets. Unfortunately, this is like a no-code interface. It's not supposed to like run into issues like this. It should fix this stuff for me. Instead, what I've ended up found that I could do is I end up writing this like little like Colab snippet in order to make the files correctly formatted. Let me just show you that really quickly. Again, this isn't a class on Colab, so I'm not going to try to bug anybody about this, but I will share this in the video description for anyone that's interested in it. I use ChatGPT to figure out how to actually write this. Again, more and more tools at our disposal, but more and more frustration as well. So basically what I did is I uploaded my file here. I can actually just run this. Let's just do this so people can see how it works. So I uploaded my file, and then I ran this first line of code to remove all of the uniques that it asked me for. Okay, sorry, 1 second. So I would go through and remove all of my uniques. Now the problem is I actually found that this still didn't solve my problem, because then when I did split testing, it would still end up with a mismatched number of things in each category. So then I had to write this other one that removed anything where the author only had 1, 2, or 3 poems in the data set. So now I've like sort of drastically reduced my data set a little bit more, but it did work after this time. So let me just copy this and we'll drop this in and we'll run this one. And now I'll go ahead and download this one. So if anyone does actually want to go through this process, I'm happy to walk through like how these tools work. Again, I would probably say like this one isn't even worth like really messing with, because just not, the results aren't very good. But now I can go ahead and re-upload this correctly. And I'll hit start training again, and hopefully this works for me this time. It did last time, sure enough. And if I go to my logs, we'll see that this will start running pretty soon. So what I'm going to do is, I think training for this took about 10 or 15 minutes to actually run. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording and wait till it's finished, and I'll come back and sort of show you what sort of happened with the model, and then we'll look at inference using this as well. I hope at this point you've seen that like this is not really usable for anyone that doesn't know exactly what they're doing. And this is one of the big challenges of these tools, is like all the little error states and all the other things you need to figure out. Don't make it really friendly for anyone. And if you wanted to make your own text classifier, this would be a huge pain in the ass without any programming knowledge or any machine learning knowledge. All right, so I'm going to pause this, and then we'll come back when this is finished training. All right, it looks like my model is finished. You can see because it's paused. It did hit 100% here, so we can go ahead and now look at it in my Huggingface space. We'll go to my profile. We'll come down here to models, where it says poetry author classifier. We'll see my loss score, not looking that great, pretty high. We'll talk about why that is in just a minute. Accuracy score is, I think, also quite low. I think that should be higher. So again, not doing great here, but we'll figure this out. The other thing I should notice, or I should mention, is that it says this is private. Because my model is private, I actually want to go and make it public. I think that I've run into issues where if a model is private, it can have issues with running on spaces. So now they've made it public, I'm going to go ahead and hit deploy and hit deploy to spaces and hit create new space. Oh, interesting. Author classifier inference. And we'll go ahead and I'll leave that at CPU. I'll hit public and I'll hit create space. So while this runs, let me talk a little bit about why I don't think this model works particularly well. And it's mostly down to the data set. So if I open up this data set in Numbers, and I look through this, and let's sort by author. So you'll see that for this, a couple of these, I've got a fair amount of text, but then for some of these, I only have 4 labels, or 4 authors and 4 titles. And this is going to lead to a lot of problems where there isn't enough data. So when we look at other classifier systems, we say we want at least like 20 samples per category. And here I only have 4 samples for a lot of these categories. So I think that's leading to essentially just like a not well-performing model. But also, when you think about the actual task I was trying to solve, it's a little bit creative and not really like a real problem. Like I'm trying to match, you know, a title. I'm trying to basically infer, can you guess a title or an author by its title, which is already kind of a crazy concept. You know, I would want to go and grab more of these authors' titles, put more of them in here, and fill this out a little bit more. But I would just basically want to prove that I could actually train this model, and I was able to train it, just not very good. So when I come back here and I close this, like let's pick an author here. So let's pick, let's go to the top here and let's pick one of these. So A.E. Housman. So let's just look up what other titles A.E. Housman has. So you'll see it's pulling from Poetry Foundation. So I want to find something that isn't a Poetry Foundation website. Here's an interesting one, Loveliest of Trees. Let's see if this is included in this list. Loveliest of Trees is there. This one is not. Tell me I'm not here. Okay, so let's plug this in to our classifier and see if it's able to guess correctly which one it thinks it is. You'll see it has no idea, right? It is really like, I could be any one of these. And again, this is probably a data problem. It's also just like a conceptually weird problem. It might be better to actually pull the entire poem and go by like whole chunks of poetry rather, because there might be more of a defined sort of inference in there. But again, this was worth testing and seeing how it worked. Training worked so-so, as you can see. Like I was able to solve everything myself. Hopefully that gave you enough of a direction that if you wanted to create one of these, you would also be able to solve it yourself. And obviously I would choose a concept or an idea that is maybe a handful of classes. This is probably why sentiment analysis is so popular, because it's a little bit easier to build the data set around, that sort of thing. Yeah, so a failed example, but a one where I certainly learned some stuff from and I think would be worth exploring more. So I hope you got a little bit out of this, and then we're going to look at some other models now that we can finally drop auto training and go check out some other tools out there. So we'll pick up over there with those videos.